And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm gonna talk about a kitchen table deck. But before I get to that, I want to start off by saying thank you to my patrons, the folks that help keep the lights on around here, pay our server fees. I really appreciate it, especially with the game being in such a weird place. The continued support means a lot to me, and I especially want to shout out Brad, Jason, Justin, Patrick, Peter, as well as all the rest of the patrons. If you want to join the coolest clubhouse in Versus, patreon.com/thebuildphase. Okay, so I promised a couple episodes ago I was going to do a kind of kitchen table deck, and then last week I wanted to talk about the regional, and I'm going to be honest, this week some things came up that I wanted to talk about other than a kitchen table deck, but I decided to lock in and follow through with this. But there are some more upper deck specific topics on the horizon, but we'll get to those when we get to them. So today I went all the way back to what some consider to be one of the best metas in the game. At the time, I don't think we knew what we had because the big three was looked at as pretty unhealthy, but the legacy meta, the legacy era of Versus is one of my fondest times with the game. For all the problem, I mean, kind of that's true throughout the whole length of Versus. I don't know that we've ever had the perfect meta or the perfect card pool, but man, we've had a lot of fun along the way regardless. So, okay, the main character I want to start with was a legacy release, and it is Electra. Now, this is one of the main characters whose card art I find incredibly irritating because she is literally throwing stars at you, the viewer. We're at the perspective. She's flinging ranged weapons at us, and this character does not have range. Like, guys, come on. Okay, so Electra is a 3/4/5. She has dodge. This was kind of a big deal at the time. As I remember, the Legacy box was the first box where a bunch of main characters actually had like commonly used keywords like dodge and tough and stuff like that. Less impressive now when we have like keyword only main characters, but this was, a unique feature to this card at the time. Ninja training, pay a red. Electra gains stealth this turn. For those who do not remember, stealth lets you attack the back row, even if the characters there are protected. And her level up condition is assassination, level up 2. When Electra stuns an enemy back row defender, she gains an XP. Now, there are some problems with this, but we'll talk about that in just a second. I want to talk about her level 2 first. So at level 2, she becomes a 6/7/5. These stats do feel so fragile compared to some modern day characters. She retains dodge, so she still can't be range attacked. Ninja training, main phase, pay a red, gains stealth, just like level 1, and she also gains Hand Experience. Main phase, pay a yellow, put Electra into her owner's hand, set aside any counters on her, and at the start of the next turn, put her on to their side with those counters. Now, when this card came out, there was not much discard in the game of Versus. There is a lot more forced discard now. A card like Mind Games, you just lose the game. So or a card that has a power like Mind Games, you can just lose the game if you use this yellow. So again, there are going to be some weaknesses. This is normally on the show, I try to think about the game in terms of tournament level decks, and there are some weaknesses. Like if there's a thing on your main character that just says you lose the game under these conditions, even if those conditions aren't that common, like people playing Emma Frost was the only Mind Games character when this card came out. That was just not a thing that happened a lot. It still feels pretty bad to have one card in the format just completely blank your level 2. But because of the philosophy I'm approaching these decks with of, we're going to build something for the kitchen table, not a room full of Swiss where we have to have answers for everything and tech cards for everything. I'm just trying to build a cool Electra deck. That's the approach I took to this. So I do acknowledge there's some glaring weaknesses both to this character and of course to the way the deck is built, but this is a kitchen table deck. That's the point of this. Okay, I'm going to stop making excuses for that. So hiding in the hand is really cool in the situations where it works out that the opponent doesn't have those discard cards. They have no real way to get to her. You can do whatever you need to do with Electra on your turn, and then you pop her into the hand, and it kind of functions the same way like an Invisible Woman deck would, the old tuck and pass, except you're tucking her into your grip as opposed to hiding her or doing something else. So the play pattern is not totally unique. Now, at the time that she came out, there was really not anything like this in the game. Now we've seen a lot of these John Cena tuck and pass style main characters. I want to see if I can make this work. Now, to my eye, the biggest obstacle with this main character is a level up problem. While she only needs 2 experience, your opponent has to play along in order for you to get that 2 experience. They have to either put characters in the back row without protecting them, or they can try to protect their back row and you have the reds to get to them. So you have some ways to get around your opponent trying to mess with your level up. But we've seen time and time again that when your opponent is given the choice of putting their character in the front or back row, if you're going to benefit from me putting my guys in the back row, I'm just not going to do it. Players just aren't going to do it. So that was a big focus around how I built this deck. So just to get the locations out of the way real quick before we start to dig into it, I've got 4 academies, 3 fortresses, 2 labs, 4 training grounds, 4 Fisk towers, and no, not Fisk towers. Those are Madripoors. That's the wrong location. Okay, I put the wrong location in here. I'll fix that. If you click the link in the show notes to take a look at this deck, this Fisk Tower mistake is going to be fixed. That should be the Femme Fatale Wild. I must have misclicked. And then a Nexus of All Realities. That's the location suite. Plot twists are 4 each of Catfight and Outposition. So Catfight is on team with Electra, and plus just a straight +4 attack in a combat is one of the strongest combat pumps we have. Electra has to be able to guarantee those stuns when she's going for her experience. We really want to make sure that goes through in the early game. And then in the late game, we're going to be relying on our supporting characters to try to win. That's going to be my strategy. So I think Catfight's good throughout the entire game. Outposition is a hammer plot twist. You put a +1 or -1 on a character, and then you can move it to a different row on its side. This is entirely about trying to play around my opponent's counterplay to my level up. I realize there's a lot of layers there. So if I'm playing Electra and you're putting all your characters in the front row to guarantee I can't get any experience, Outposition lets me shrink your dude a little bit, move your dude to the back row, and then swing into it with Electra. So it does 2 things we really want. One of them not so well, and the other it's perfect in. The shrinking the guy helps because Electra's stats, while we do have to get stuns, so she is kind of an aggressively slanted main character in terms of XP, her stat block is not aggressively slanted. She's a 3/4. There's going to be a lot of things she can't hit. So the -1/-1 on Outposition can sometimes save us a wound, which is important because 5 health feels really fragile by 2024 versus standards on a character with these stats and these powers. So it can try to save us a wound, or it can try to let us push through a stun when we wouldn't have otherwise gotten it. Now, admittedly, a differential of 1 is not huge, but the reason this card is in here is the second sentence, then move it to a different row. So this can potentially help with the stat block problem. Not much, but a little bit. But it helps with the positioning problem, which is the bigger problem, I think, for Electra as a main character. Because we have this off team, this hammer plot twist in here, I really want that to be active, especially during the early game. I don't care if we have a turn 6 activator for Outposition. If it's turn 6 and I haven't leveled up yet, that's a huge problem. I did build the early deck with hammer characters to try to make sure that I could get this Outposition online in those early turns where it really, really is crucial for Electra to try to collect that experience and then maybe start dipping into the hand and hiding. So the first 1-drop in the deck, the only 1-drop in the deck, is the hammer affiliated Mystique. This is just here as a activator for Outposition. It's a 1/4. There is a very slim chance that rather than using this as an activator for Outposition, I might spend a red for Electra instead of giving her stealth to try to get to the back row. Depending upon how the opponent's front row looks, I might spend a red on Mystique and KO her to put 3 -1 counters on each front row character. There are going to be board states where, especially if your opponent is pushing everything to the front, where you could throw this down on like a turn 3 or turn 4 and just kill a bunch of things. That can happen. That's not the primary purpose this card serves, but it's a nice little extra payoff. Next, I have Ghost. 4 copies of this 2-drop. Ghost can't strike or be struck in melee combat, and Ghost doesn't protect characters and can attack protected characters. So a 3/3 for 2 isn't like the best. Like, I don't really care for these stats, but the intangible helps a little bit in that this is going to be a character that's a little bit harder for my opponent to deal with. They probably don't look at the stats as like that much of a threat, so maybe they don't want to waste an action on it. And I hope that Ghost can is just awkward enough to deal with that she can stick around and act as an activator for outposition over the early turns of the game. The 3 attack on range probably isn't going to be super relevant most of the time, but it is something. There's something there. There's enough value there that in addition to being a outposition activator, this can potentially help. And maybe there's like a team attack or something. So we'll get to it as we get to it. The other 2-drop I'm packing, shout out to Justin, is the 2-cost Major Victory. There's 4 copies of this. This is a 2/4/1 character. None of that's very cool. He does have range, which is, I mean, this is all fine, I guess, for a 2-drop. I do like the 4 defense because that's going to keep him alive a little bit longer. But the big thing I like is being able to pay a yellow and push an enemy character to its back row. So this is a facilitator for Electra. Now the drawback is you have to pay a yellow. So that's a yellow that is going to be coming off the same plate that Electra's eating off of for her Hand Experience ability. But we've got to get to the Hand Experience before that even matters. And my guess is it's only going to be 2 or 3 yellows, 2 or 3 turns of hiding Electra while our supporting characters get it done. And that's all we're going to need. So she's not going to need all 8 of the yellows that are in the deck, her wild cards plus the 4 academies. And Major Victory has the extra access to the Nexus of All Realities, which could be the yellow. So this one is a little bit awkward. I don't generally like having a lot of characters that use the same color superpowers as my main character because that can lead to some problems. Being able to have the appropriate colors you need to kick off your main character's superpowers, which tend to be more important. But I make an exception here for Major Victory because this power is just so relevant. Moving on to the only 3-drop in the deck, 4 copies of this guy. Basically the same thing as Major Victory. He's a 3/5, which is a defensive stat block, which we like. Only 1 health, which we don't like. And Cattle Prod, main phase, pay a blue and move an enemy front row character to its back row and remove all +1 counters from it. So if I could just run 8 Major Victories, I probably would in this case. Parker is slower. He does have the added ability of shrinking the character if there's +1 counters on it, but that is not super relevant. He is one of the reasons we have blue in the deck. Now, it's not the only blue consumer in the deck, but I didn't feel like I had the room to go too heavy into these other colors, but this power is just too important. So he's got 3 activations, which is not a lot for this guy, but we only need to force somebody into the back row twice for Electra to do her thing. Next up, we have Madame Medusa. She is a 3/8/1, so the defensively, like, I really want to be able to build a board here. So I did value characters that had really big butts throughout this whole deck. It's not the only consideration, but you'll see that as a theme. There's a lot of characters with big butts in here early in the curve. When she appears, I can choose an enemy character and make it immobile until it leaves play. So if I push somebody to your back row with Parker, or you have somebody in your back row, I can make sure they get locked down with Madame Medusa. This is not my primary 4-drop. She's kind of a backup. The main 4-drop I wanted to get out there was Quake. And Quake's power pushes each enemy front row supporting character to the back row. I have 4 copies of her, and I have 3 greens in the deck just for her, plus the Nexus. If we get to turn 4 and I'm still looking for experience, we're in desperation mode at that point. So Quake is there to try to shove as many of those characters out of the way as possible to hopefully be able to snag that red that I need to have somebody in the back row to get Electra leveled up. The last 4-drop is the Cometfall Leviathan, who also pushes a front row enemy character to its back row. So there's a theme here on turn 4. We really need to get these cards where we need them, ideally earlier than turn 4, but we'll take what we can get. Moving into the 5-drops in the deck, we have Satana. Now this is a Femme Fatale affiliated character, and she gives all characters on my side Femme Fatale, which opens up some crazy team attacks, and she has lethal. That's all good stuff. Plus, we can pay a blue and pull a character out of an enemy player's KO pile and then delete that character from the game. They reveal their hand, their deck, their KO pile, and they take all copies of that card out. Now, we do have to get that problematic card in the KO pile first, which could be difficult sometimes, but that's a really, really strong kind of run away with the game, late game power. So there's 3 copies of her. She does a bunch of good stuff, even if she doesn't see the blue. And then there's those couple of blues, plus she has access to the Fem Wilds. Next, I have Thing. This guy's a 5/5 with 3 health for 5, and when he stuns a defender, you move it to the back row and it gets locked down. Now, this can be useful in the sense that now there's a character they can't attack with next turn, and it can be useful if we're in a really bad spot. Maybe this helps Electra get her experience on turn 6, but we probably already lost those games. So this is more about kind of continuing the theme of messing with the opponent, but also he's decent, like not great stats for 5, but that 3 health, he's going to stick around for a while. If we can get a Satana out there, well, now we've got some crazy team attack options. So good stuff. To top out the curve, we have 2 more hammer characters. Ares is just, I mean, this is a 7-drop who has not gotten the respect he deserves, largely because so often when he's legal in formats, so is like Jungle Hunter, which is just like the most pushed 7-drop in the history of history. There's some other really gross ones out there too, but I have always really liked Ares. This guy is a 10/7/3, which is great. He can't be ranged attacked because of dodge. Enemy players can't play plot twists while he's in combat because of Combat Master, and he has lethal. So he does all this really cool stuff, and he doesn't need any locations to do it. He's just a keyword powerhouse. This is a fun card. I like this card a lot. And at the very top of the curve, I've got Sentry, 18/18/2 with flight and range, but he can't strike unless we pay a yellow to let him strike. Now, most of the time, what I want to be doing with my yellows is using them to gain life with Electra. Every time I pay a yellow and put her in the hand, that's a turn where you can't put a wound on her. But they're at the very end of the game. At the very end of the game, maybe there's going to be some situations where we pay that yellow and we slam that Sentry through for a finish. Also, he's just a huge, annoying blocker, tough to deal with, and activates our out positions, which even in the late game could be relevant. So the overall plan for this deck is try to level as quickly as possible, and we do that by nuking their front row with Mystique or shoving their characters to the back row to, again, nuking the front row with Mystique while hopefully they already have a character in the back row, or shoving characters to the back row with our 2s, 3s, and even up through our 4s and 5s have ways to push things to the back row. We don't really want to be relying on things stunning a guy, moving it to the back row. It has to stay there for a turn, and then next turn we go attack into it to level up. That's so slow, but he's bringing other things to the table as well. We have 4 super aggressive plot twists, the ability to give +4 attack with Catfight can be really strong. This is an excellent plot twist that can push through combats that you probably shouldn't have otherwise won, and you're probably going to need that help. Electra's stats are not great. A lot of our early game cards do not have great attack values. Catfight can make up that deficiency, or it can go on something like Ares to just really push through, or the Thing to really push through an annoying character that's on board. This has been my first kind of casual kitchen table approach to a deck build that I've done on the show, or at least done on the show in many years. And I had a lot of fun with this. I got real frustrated trying to figure out which of the characters that had push abilities I could afford to have in my deck and which ones I couldn't. That is probably a weakness here, in addition to all the stuff I talked about with like Electra's sort of baked in weaknesses. Without Satana, we lose some team attacking in the mid game. Like we've got a handful of team attackers in the very early game, and then we have team attackers in the late game. And if we really need team attackers, that can put us in some awkward positions in those mid game turns. Satana, while these team up abilities have not always been super relevant, we haven't seen that many of them throughout the history of Versus. I think in this deck, I might even want to go up to 4 copies on this 5-drop and drop down to only 2 Thing. I've kind of flirted between the 2 of them, but I'm at the point where I need to do some testing and see where we end up. Although, I guess the whole concept of deck testing is almost antithetical to the kitchen table, right? I just bring this thing and see what happens. Okay, so this has been the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and you should go win some games.